Do successful men in America have narcissistic traits? Absolutely. Have they grown to be pretty darn entitled? Yes. I can see why people would assume that about my groups, right? And then for the betrayed partners, you can see why they would be like, well, why do I want this guy to go hang around a bunch of guys with these personality traits? The entire reason I put these groups together was to actually combat those things. Are my groups full of a bunch of narcissists? It is a common assumption, right? Because all of my groups are full of high-achieving entrepreneurial men, lawyers, doctors, surgeons, sales professionals, business owners of different kinds. I get why they would assume that these are a bunch of just narcissistic men with overinflated egos. I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'll be the first to admit, do successful men in America have narcissistic traits? Absolutely. Absolutely. Have they grown to be pretty darn entitled? Yes, they have. I'm not going to say that they haven't. And along with that, grandiosity, extremely egoic behaviors, no question about it. So I can see why people would assume that about my groups, right? And then for the betrayed partners, you can see why they would be like, well, why do I want this guy to go hang around a bunch of guys with these personality traits? Well, here's why, though. It's actually the opposite of what you would think, right? I think the assumption is that being around these men is going to promote more narcissistic traits and use of these traits. It's going to promote more grandiosity, more superiority complexes, more, hey, we're special, we're entitled, we're above the rules, right? It's actually the opposite, though. Literally, the entire reason I put these groups together was to actually combat those things. And now hear me out. So let's say you go to a group that's open to the general population, right? And it's not specific to high-achieving men. So now here you are, and everyone is talking about their addiction stories, their personality flaws, and the different belief systems that they've developed that needs to change, right? But what if none of it has to do with things that you deal with as a high-achieving man in America? Is that actually beneficial? And so it's this paradox of where I think everyone says like, oh, I don't want my husband in that environment around men like that because it's going to make the problems worse. It could not be further from the truth. It is actually the exact opposite. I would say if guys are going into a room where all the other men in that room don't struggle with successful male entitlement. They don't struggle with this sense of superiority and this desire to be the best. They aren't really confident, outgoing, and trying to constantly use kind of these egoic pieces of their success for self-gain, right? If the other guys in the room are not struggling in the same way that you're struggling with your thought processes, I would say you're creating more blind spots. If there's no other successful guy in the room who operates and has a sexual compulsivity like you, I would say there's blind spots. You won't talk about it nearly as much as you probably should. Because it's funny, the very traits, grandiosity, entitlement, the narcissistic traits, the desire to be superior and the superiority complex, right? This constant thirst for novelty and, boredom is our enemy, right? All of these traits definitely, without question, I'll be the first to admit, have promoted, caused, made our sexually compulsive behaviors worse. No question about it. And those are the very things that need to be discussed. So my point is, it's interesting, right? The assumption, I think, is like, oh, it's a bunch of just rich dudes hanging out who don't really want to change. There's nothing further from the truth. Yes, they are successful men. And yes, have they done well for themselves financially? Sure. But do we want to keep being this way? Entitled? You kidding me? No. Entitled, that's the last thing I want to be. Narcissistic? You bet that's even worse. Superior, right? That I walk into every room and like for decades I've been trying to be better than other men. And now I realize that that's actually severed my ability to connect and be equal with others. What kind of guy thinks he's above the rules? What are you, freaking 10 years old? I mean, these are not good traits to have. And so, no, in no way are my groups full of men trying to hang on to these traits. It is the exact opposite. I would say daily, weekly, and at the intensives, a huge focus of the discussion is we got to get this crap out of our life. We can't walk around trying to be better than others and striving to be superior, right? This whole thing that, oh, we've worked hard and we've accomplished, so now we're entitled to these certain things. I mean, come on. It's childish. It's this childish behavior. So the reason I record this is it is a very common question that I get from therapists and betrayed partners, like why a group for successful men? And here's the reason why. Two reasons. One, Their compulsivity is entirely different. It is very much driven through this need for attention, respect, admiration, superiority. Again, it's feeding that grandiosity. So in many ways, this program, yes, it's a addiction program, but the driver from this addiction is from this grandiose superiority complex male entitlement thing. It really is. That's the cause. So yes, are we filling the room with men struggling with that very same process addiction? Yes, intentionally. We are intentionally doing that to increase the likelihood that we are actually addressing the very issues that men like this are struggling with. And the goal isn't to keep being this way. We're not trying to create this like special group where we're better than other men in addiction. That is not the case at all. I'm trying to create an environment where men can connect with other men who have the same process addiction, right? Who are engaging in the exact same unwanted brain practices, right? Whereas when they go to 12-step and the room's full of guys who just have a very different sex addiction than them, how connecting is that? How much are we actually having the conversations that we need to have to get over some of these beliefs that are actually driving all this behavior in the first place? So again, are my groups full of narcissists, grandiose men, entitled men? Sure. You could say that, and I wouldn't think it's necessarily false, but I would say, are we proud of becoming that way? Are we born that way? Do we want to stay that way? No. There's not a single guy in any one of my groups who likes those traits and doesn't recognize that it has almost destroyed their entire life and what it looks like, and could destroy their family and completely ruin their wife's, sense of self and sense of future and past, right? We see the ugliness of these traits, and they are unattractive traits, and they're frankly just traits that we never really wanted to have in the first place. So in no way are we trying to keep any of this superiority. The only reason we are gathering together is because we have a lot in common, and it's just easier to connect and easier to have really insightful discussions around our very specific process addiction. In no way is it because we think we're better than other people. It's not like a rich man's club. That is not what this is. It is a place to gather around having a very similar process addiction that we are all pursuing so that we can change it faster.